Good afternoon. Um, I just had a bunch of coffee, so if I talk too fast or I'm not making any sense, can you just kind of wave, let me know something is not okay? It's after lunch, so I'm sort of hoping that you all had coffee as well. Otherwise, my job for the next 45 minutes is going to be very hard. Wake up! Okay, cool. Um, so this is all, I'm going to talk about attention, which is really hard to do after lunch, so bear with me. Um, and I want to start by making a little bit of a disclaimer, if that's okay. This is a bit cheeky, actually, to give the disclaimer before I even start talking. But my background is in sort of brain science, and I'm going to talk a little bit about brains. And I'm sort of taking a risk there a little bit because I want what I have to say to matter to you. But a problem that we have with brain images, let me explain this. So this is a frequent occurrence in my world, which is to say that there's some story in the news and it has a vague bearing on psychology or on brains in some way, but like they never explicitly explain why it has to do with the brain. They just go blah, 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 brain. And then they go, so in summary, brain. And there's no connection between the brain part and the story part. And what we know from psychology is that people are actually much more likely to believe that story if you mention the brain or if you show a picture of a brain. And so that's a bit of a problem for me because quite often I do talk about the brain and I don't want you to be persuaded because I showed you a picture or I said a fancy word. And this has been referred to as the seductive allure of neuroscience explanations. So there's this kind of compelling thing that makes people more likely to believe you if you show pictures of the brain or if you talk about neuroscience as part of your story. And I don't want you to be seduced. What makes this, I don't want to be the guy in the white coat going blah, 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 brain, and you go, oh, yeah, brilliant. If you think today is brilliant, then yeah, please vote. No, if you think today is brilliant, then that's good, but I don't want to do it because of the brain thing. The logical extension of that is that we get images like this, which is just about my favorite thing on the internet ever. But there's another problem, which is that actually the idea that pictures of the brain compelling is in itself compelling. The idea that you are more persuaded if I show you a picture of the brain is, it turns out, more persuasive than the alternative. So there's the seductive allure of seductive allure. So I no longer know what planet I'm on, and I might be upside down at this point, who knows. But that's really the end of the disclaimer. Be critical. Evaluate everything that I say critically, and anyone else waving pictures of the brain around, you should evaluate them very critically as well. So let's talk about vision a little bit, having said that. So basic vision recap for anyone who doesn't really know or think very much about this stuff. Light comes into the eye. It hits the retina, which is this amazingly complicated kind of part of the body. And that information travels down the optic nerve. So already had a little bit of processing. Like we haven't really seen anything yet, but it's already done some processing. The information from each eye is encoded by different cells. The information about where stuff is that you're looking at, where you all are in comparison to me, is different from what I'm looking at. So that's a chair, but that's a person. And things like hue and contrast are also encoded down different pathways. We haven't actually processed any of this information yet. We don't know what it means, but already there's some kind of segregation of function. And this is happening in, like milliseconds, tens of milliseconds. It's so fast. And eventually it gets to the end. And then it just kind of explodes all over the back of your brain. So what's happening when we see a thing, like a mobile phone, but could be anything, is that there's this range of areas of the brain that all deal with slightly different information and help you process that visual information in slightly different ways. There's a very fast pathway called the where pathway. It's called the dorsal pathway. It doesn't matter. And that basically figures out where stuff is in relation to you. It's very, very fast. It's very useful that it's fast, right? Because you want to know if things are near you or further away from you. It helps you guide your movements, to grab things. It helps you run away from things that are dangerous. And the parts of this the parts of this pathway include things like area V3, which encodes motion, so it can tell if stuff is kind of moving, and area V5, which encodes motion and direction, so you can kind of, the neurons in that pathway kind of encode what a thing is and where it is, and they work out, you know, what is this thing I'm looking at based on its movements, what are all the bits. There's also a part of the brain called the parietal cortex, which is a big part of the dorsal pathway, and that really governs attention management. That means that's all about, like, what am I looking at right now? What do I need to be looking at? And it's kind of a focus for managing your attention. And so when you're sort of following a thing around, your brain is, in part of that is reflexive, part of that is just very fast, hey, something's moving, I should orient towards that. And part of it is, well, actually, maybe I should keep looking at this because it might be important. So attention kind of has two parts in that regard. When that part of the brain is damaged, you get situations like this, where this was drawn by somebody who has damage to the parietal lobe of the brain, and they've been asked to draw a clock, and they have what's called hemispatial neglect, so they do not really notice anything on their left-hand side. The part of the brain that's damaged is on the right, and instead, that's their drawing of the clock, is everything is on the right. And you can imagine that this is very damaging for them, right? Because, you know, imagine trying to cross the road, you know, looking for traffic when you don't really notice anything, when your attention can't grasp anything on your left side. Similarly, in Alzheimer's disease, there's a problem with the attentional part of the brain. I say that like it's one part. Attention is all over the brain, but this specifically the parietal area of the brain. This is a down view of the brain here. So the top of the screen is the front of the brain, the bottom of the screen is the back of the brain. And these bits here, on the left you see the normal brain, and all the red bits, I hope anyone's not colorblind, all the kind of strongly colored bits that do all that, those are the kind of bits that are really active, they're metabolically active, they're burning through more glucose. And this is the brain of somebody who has Alzheimer's disease, and you can see that these areas are not the same, they're not as active, they're kind of green color. And this is because the brain of someone with Alzheimer's dementia, we think of it as a forgetting disease, and it kind of is, but it's also a disease of attention management, or attention failure, really. People with Alzheimer's disease will sort of stop in the middle of a task, they can't manage their attention to finish the task, or sometimes they will repeat the same thing and the same thing because they can't manage their attention to move on from that. So it's also partly a disease of attention. So we can see that these parts of the brain are really important for attention and for managing it and focusing it on a useful task. So that's the where pathway. It's very fast, it's very useful, it governs our attention and our ability to focus on things that are moving or things that might be important. The other pathway is much slower. It's the what pathway. So once we've oriented our attention to something, then we've got to think about, well, what is it? What am I looking at? And so the areas of the brain involved in this are many and all differently specialized. And this includes area V1, which kind of takes these little line fragments and it recognizes individual fragments and says, okay, this is at this orientation and maybe that other part over there is at that orientation. Maybe they form some kind of edge or feature. And this is kind of compounded in area V2, where we recognize edges. Here are some edges. So does everyone see the triangles? Yep. Okay, now just look again, there are no triangles. Sorry, you made that up, right? So if you actually look what is here, there are 3 V shapes and 3 little Pac-Man shapes, but there are no triangles. So your brain makes stuff up all the time. There are no edges of those triangles. They're not complete, right? We just sort of infer that they'll be complete. Sorry, the mic drops out when I turn around my head. I'll try not to do that very much. Turning slowly. So we make stuff up based on our experiences. So this illusion of triangles is a really good example because it basically says, okay, when we don't see something, like when I go behind this table, oh no, Chris doesn't have a middle. It's okay, I have a middle. But when we don't see that part, we don't go, wow, there's a part missing. There is a part behind another thing. So there's this table, and then behind that is Chris. And that's the assumption that we're making here, is that, okay, well, something rational must have happened. We know how the world works. We know that when a thing is missing, it's often just, or part of a thing is missing, it's often just behind another thing. And visual illusions are like that. They relate to our experiences, our practical experiences every day. Other things that happen in V4 is that we encode color, and we also encode, not in V4, but in a separate area, we encode face as well. This is dropping out a lot. Shall I use the other mic? Okay. Excuse me a moment. I have to change my hair. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, everybody good? Yep. Excellent. Right, where were we? Okay, so there are parts of the brain in this whole what pathway that encode things like color and faces and so on. And this is all about understanding, okay, now that I have my attention on this thing, what is it? What is it made of? What am I looking at? And so we've got this situation where, first of all, you're like, okay, where is stuff happening? And then you're like, okay, what is happening there? And if I show you a kind of abstraction of this, this is just some stuff, right? Some data. You don't really know what it is yet. First of all, you're going to group it because that's the where. All this stuff is together, and we group that on the basis of similarity. Basically, we're like, well, all these things are near each other, so they're obviously related in some way. And then later on, we might go, oh, actually, it's more complicated. So of all those things, some are purple, some are kind of blue-green. Oh, or some of them are triangles, some of them are squares. But those kinds of decisions happen much more slowly because the what pathway is much more slow. Here's a kind of fun thing for you. This is vaguely related. I'll explain why in a moment. Who sees Albert Einstein? Anyone see anything else? Oh man, okay, this is about the size of room. Yep. Beethoven? Marilyn Monroe, okay. Who thinks the person who sees Marilyn Monroe is a little bit crazy because there's no Marilyn there? Okay, most of you right. You are not alone, sir. Okay, so if I shrink that, now what do you see? Okay, right. Now I have not played a trick. This is the same image. I want to prove it to you, okay? This is my slide deck when I was making this slide, right? Everyone can see Albert over here, right? And then here's Marilyn in thumbnail. That is the same image. So what is happening? So the big image, basically you can see all the kind of the low frequency noise stuff, so excuse me, the high noise, so the very fine lines. When that shrunk, all you see is the big low frequency stuff. And this is a very clever image that's designed to show you a different thing depending on how near you are, how small or big the image is, and how far away the different lines appear and how far apart those are on your retina, right? And typically what happens is that we move from the kind of global picture and then we process the kind of smaller, finer details. So we start with the kind of the where and the general picture, and then we kind of zoom in and look at the specific details. But what does that mean for mobile usability? Well, so for starters, when we look at a phone and we process the information on the phone, we're going to start at a very global level, and then we're going to get more specific and more specific and more specific. And that has a consequence for what we put on the phone, on the screen. So this is a page from a government service that I've been working on in the UK. And if we think about how we process this initially, when someone looks at this page, what's actually happening is that we kind of get a general sense of some stuff on the page, and then we process a little bit more, so maybe we get some color, we get a bit more detail, and then finally we get the real thing. But it's that kind of, that stage that is interesting to me here, right? Because what is it that sticks out? The button, right? The green button at the center, right? It's a really, really strong call to action. And that's really important because that, like, if you can make it that easy for people, then that's helpful for them to know what to do next. And because it's a government service and anybody needs to be able to use it, it has to be really, really simple and clear to use. So a lot of the time I spend thinking about how can we make calls to action really clear on the page. And I'm sorry to say that size does matter a little bit. Location is also very important. So like estate agents tell us, you know, when you're buying a house, it is all about both of these things, in fact. Everything is a fight for the user's attention. This is kind of my thing, right? Is that everything I look at is kind of, I'm thinking about attention and how your attention is being managed. And your attention is constantly being hijacked by things that are happening around you. It likes things that are novel. So anything that's kind of new or hasn't happened recently, and when I say recently, I mean like in the last second. That's recently. Suits me. I can't keep a thread of conversation, so this is great for me. It's like, this is my level. 1 second. So if you look at something like this, it's quite compelling because it just keeps changing and it keeps changing. I'm going to stop that because some of you are starting to highlight. There's also stuff like this where like we've created mobile interfaces that kind of just they talk to themselves. It's kind of nice, but they're also attracting our attention. So we're compelled by things because they move. And I guess you notice that when you're looking at this screen, as soon as something moves, your eye is drawn to it a little bit. And that's your attention just orienting to things that are new because it might be important for you. You don't know yet. Until your attention has put your vision there, has made you focus on that thing, you don't know yet. And attention also likes things that are salient. So by salient, I mean just anything that is kind of could be important or meaningful to you. So I was this was in Stockholm recently actually, and I was walking around this park with my husband and I went, oh hey, it's the Twitter logo. This is just some old farm machinery, right? And my husband's like, what? I said, no, look, it's the Twitter logo. And he is like, you are a freak. But this is what attention does. Attention points us to things. It's like a small child, right? Just tugging on your sleeve the whole time going, hey, look, hey, look, hey, look, hey, look. And a lot of the time, the things that it's telling you to look at are actually really useful, if not important. I love this. I don't know how well you can read this. I'm sorry, it was really dark in the lift when I took this. So your options are top floor, 17th floor, which you can only get to with a special key, lobby, basement, alarm. What is the salient call to action in this lift panel? Every time I got into that lift, I'm like, no. Russ Olsen said something really cool today in his keynote. Like, the entire keynote was cool, actually. But he said that ancient machine couldn't really do both things at the same time, so it crashed. And I thought, what a great metaphor for attention. Attention's really, like, limited, so at any given moment, you're probably really only keeping your attention on one thing. And multitasking, for example, has a cost. Like if you want to be looking at your email and then something else, and your email and something else, every time you context switch, that has a cost cognitively, and you have to kind of reorient and start over a little bit. But I thought this was a great metaphor for really how we manage our attention. And the more things there are to concentrate on, the more your attention is split, and that comes at a cost, right? So this came to me recently. I love this. This is a beautiful thing. It's the thing is, for the people who use this is probably great because they spent like the last 2 years like learning what this means and how to use it. But for anybody else, can you imagine day one on your new job, right? And they're like, okay, off you go. What? And someone asked me about like how can we kind of evaluate, you know, how can I make these kind of what's the most salient feature thing? And I actually realized that oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll come back to that. Here's another example. This is the Bloomberg terminal, which is used for financial news and trading and so on. And it's pretty complex. The people who use this are proud of how complicated it is because it's taken them a long time to understand. And IDEO actually tried to rework it. I'm sorry, this is not the best picture, perhaps. It's not very detailed. You can still see there's a lot of information on that screen, but it's a little bit cleaner, a little bit more modern. Doesn't look like a kind of DOS window anymore. But to be honest, if I redid the Bloomberg terminal, it would look like that, because that's about as much information as I think anyone can reasonably take in. And of course, actually, if you're an expert, you're used to all these things. But still, I think that like the most useful things on this would be like if you have 2 or 3 things and they just go, hey, this has changed, or like this value has gone below a particular threshold, you should sell that stock or whatever. So this kind of information, not like absolutely everything all the time. And if you are learning, if this is your first day on the job, everything that is novel is a legitimate target for you, right? Like you do not know, because you haven't internalized yet, what are the important things. And so literally anything could be really important. I love websites like this. I've kind of taken the banner off at the top because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but 3 characteristics of great website design, and you're like, okay, where is it? Where is it? Oh my goodness, and you actually have to scroll down past all the advertising to find those 3 characteristics of great website design. And yeah, I know, right? But web advertising is, you know, probably keeping this guy in business, maybe. the flip side of this is where like people take advantage of the fact that you can't concentrate on everything. This is Ryanair, who like to try and sell everything. They particularly like hiding things like this is the don't insure me option in this alphabetized list of countries of where you live. Who is going to find that, right? I mean, that's what they want. They want to not find that so that they can then sell you insurance and make a little bit extra money on your flight. And this is what we call a dark pattern. This is where people are really exploiting how attention works to get some commercial benefit, but in a nasty way. I googled dark patterns for mobile because I thought it would be interesting to see if anyone had kind of catalogued these, and I actually just found this. So yeah, be careful what you wish for. So, like Einstein said, very smart guy Einstein, he said everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. And that is actually very difficult to do. So this is my idea of a great UI. It's perfect. It does absolutely everything you need it to do, and probably more than I would want it to do, because I don't really care about logging in. You know, I just want to do my Google search. And this is lovely, but of course, Google can have a really simple UI because they spent a long time getting the functionality right. It took a long time, really, for them to get an algorithm that was better than all of the other search options out there. And they're still continuously collecting data and trying to refine it. Personally, I think they're not doing a great job at the moment. I think my Google searches are not as helpful as they used to be. But you know, they've got a lot of material to work with. And since about 10 years ago, when everyone kind of went, "Oh, hey, the web is a thing," now there's more stuff, so it's harder for them to organize. But this is the perfect UI. If all of your engineering underneath works really well, this is the perfect UI, right? Just type in what you want, it'll get it. It's like the equivalent of the Star Trek replicator, basically. You just tell it what you want, stuff comes. It's amazing. On the other hand, sometimes it needs to be complicated. Like this is a piece of medical equipment for the iPhone. I think it's for the iPhone, I forget the platform. And it's not beautiful. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It would be nice, but it's not, you know, it doesn't have to be. But it's functional, right? This is for medical professionals. And maybe it needs to be this complicated. Like if we took it away, if we just turned it into the Google UI, maybe that would be too simple and it wouldn't help. It wouldn't remind people about what they need to do. So we need to think about simple, but not so simple that it's harder for somebody to do their job. And I came to this conclusion pretty late after thinking about this for a long time, which is that failures of UI are basically failures of attention management. If your UI is failing people, part of the reason that's probably happening is because it's not managing their attention, it's not directing them to the right thing at the right time, which is what a UI needs to be able to do. And I've seen this so many times. We've been designing this visa and immigration form for the government in the UK so people can come and work or study or live in the UK. And this is an early prototype. And we're just getting people to put in, you know, their passport information and stuff like that. And people would miss a lot of fields. So they would often leave out like the year or the month that they were born, and they wouldn't realize, and then the message, you know, it would go to the server and it would come back with an error message, and they would have to do it again. And it's too much, basically, like we're asking people to do too much. Exactly the same here. This is kind of what's happening, right? Stare at the green dot. No, I'm not hypnotizing you, actually. Just look at the green dot for a minute. I don't know how well this is going to work, because I don't know if it's quite big enough for everybody. What do you see if you keep staring at the green dot? Only the dot. What about the other dots? They disappear. Right, now, stop staring at, no, stop staring at the green dot. Okay, for a minute, thank you. And look at the other dots. They're there the whole time, right? They never disappear. But when you start looking just at the green flashing dot, sometimes they look like they disappear. And this is exactly what is happening with your attention, okay? Is that when you focus exclusively on one thing, and particularly if it's animated or moving or whatever, you can completely miss all the other stuff. I didn't show the gorilla video because I think most people have seen it now, but you've seen that, right, where there's like people playing basketball and you've got to count the number of times they bounce the ball, and while you're looking at that, someone in a gorilla suit walks on and waves and walks off. And lots of people don't notice the gorilla the first time because they're so busy counting the number of times the players pass the ball. Exactly the same thing here. Okay, I'm going to stop that now. You're so glad, right? And this is a thing called inattentional blindness. It just basically means that when you're concentrating very hard on one thing specifically, all your attention is there, and you don't really have a lot of attention for all of the other stuff around the outside. You are managing your attention, and you're keeping it focused on that one thing, which is good, but sometimes you can miss some other things, which is not always a good thing. And so we ended up with this visa form asking fewer questions per page because we realized that it was annoying for people to sometimes miss one thing and then have to look at the whole page again. So this is what we've got now. It works really well. Nobody misses stuff. There are so few options on the page that nobody really misses anything. So it's working much better for us. And you've got to think about all of this in the context of which people actually use their phones, right? So people are walking around, they're looking at their phones, they kind of look away, they cross the road, they look at their phone, they do something, they tap a few buttons, they look around, constantly our attention is moving from the phone to what's around us, to what's happening, what we're listening to, what we're looking at. And that's pretty complicated. So I'm going to show you a thing that demonstrates that why it's a problem. Well, not why it's a problem, but why it's kind of interesting that mobile attention is brief. So there's something happening. Every time this picture hiccups, there's something happening. What is it? The bag. Anything else? Oh, the bike seat. Yeah. Everyone see that? Just watch it a couple more times, if we can do that. Yeah, see the bike seat. Right, you didn't notice that, right? It's like it's big and it's yellow and you didn't notice it. And this is a thing called change blindness. So it's a little bit similar to inattentional blindness before, like I talked about before, where you're looking so hard at a thing that you don't see the other things. Change blindness is when a thing flickers, like when there's this discontinuity in your vision, then you keep the sense of what is going on. Like there's a woman, there's a lot of bicycles, she's got a bike, she's got a bag, but you lose the specifics. It's almost like your brain is a piece of videotape and you kind of overwrite it. Each time it flickers, you overwrite it a little bit. So because you are, kind of a cognizant, functioning human being, you can remember the gist of what was happening, so you can remember roughly what's happening. But those specifics get lost when that happens. And that's potentially a problem for user interfaces, right? So here's an example that I mocked up. I did some work at Skype a few years ago, and we were testing this idea. I'm sorry I don't have screenshots. I still kick myself that I didn't take screenshots at the time. So here's my all of my contacts in Skype, and I click on one of those, and here's all their information. And we were testing this idea that you might want to add tags. You know the way that you can add people to Google Circles now, right, on Google+. The same idea, you might want to group people like their work or friends or whatever, or family. So if someone clicked on the add tags thing, it would bring up this modal, and they would type in some tags and then say, okay, right, I'm done, add these tags. And then they would click on that and it would go away and they'd be like, did it work? And they hadn't seen it. They couldn't see where the change had happened because the entire screen had changed, right, between here and here. Like what they're doing hasn't changed. The task is still that they're trying to add some tags, but there's this discontinuity. There's this kind of global change. The modal has gone away, and now they're totally lost. And actually, the tags were right up there, but they didn't see them because this was all new. And that discontinuity just threw them completely. They had no idea what just happened. And so think about when you're walking around and you're looking at everything all the time. What does that mean for your mobile interface, right? Because if someone is constantly looking up and looking at other things and switching between apps, how are they going to notice all the changes? How are they going to notice the things that you want them to notice? The good news for attention, because attention is, small and thin and easily distracted, very much so, is that on a mobile, you only have so much space, right? Like you've got so little room to actually say anything that you almost can't say too many things. And mobile first is a great way of designing, and I really do believe this, having been doing it for the last 18 months or so, is that it forces you to focus, because you cannot say everything at once. If you think about designing for a desktop, you've got so much space that you can completely ruin it, right? By just, destroying it by putting stuff everywhere, and then no one knows what they're supposed to do next. And again, that's fine for experts. It's maybe not so good for beginners. So when we're wireframing and when we're talking about what we're going to do, you can only fit a tiny amount in each of these. This is my crappy wireframes from a couple of weeks ago. You can only put a very little information, so it makes you think really hard about, well, what's the call to action? What is the next thing that this person has to do, and how do I get them there? Sometimes we do have to give them a lot of information, and we're really struggling with this. So one of the things that you have to do when you're applying online for a visa to come to the UK is that when you pay, like normally online, it's not the end, right? Well, sorry, excuse me, it is normally the end. When you pay in your online transaction, boom, payment done, you get an email, finito. Here, no, you're not done. You have to go to an appointment, you have to get your photograph and your fingerprints taken, and you have to do all this other stuff. And so we don't want people to switch off at the end of the transaction when they've paid. We want to tell them more stuff. But in their brains, they're like, oh, but I'm done already, right? But they're not done. And so there's all this information that we have to give people, and it's really hard to convey that. And we see that when people have to deal with all of this information, they just kind of, they just go. Like, basically, they don't want to read. Nobody wants to read a lot of stuff. They just scroll until they're done. And so in the real world, it's nice to say, oh, you only got to have one call to action. But actually, sometimes there are like 2, 3, 4 legitimate calls to action about what someone might want to do next. And it's really, really hard to design for that and not overwhelm people. Because you're also trying to give them a bit of information about where they are as well, right? Like you've got your navigation and you've got what's happening, the context right now. And then you've got, here are some more things you could do. And this is a nice, in many ways, it's a really, really nice UI. It's just a do-it-yourself, a kind of home construction type company in the UK. And so we're sort of trying to think about that for ourselves. Like, these are some things you've got to download. Well, there are 2 things that you need to download when you're done with your visa application, and one thing that you could if you want to download. And then there's a kind of, oh, but we're not done yet. Please go to the next section. It's really, really hard to do this and to manage people's attention. Because at any point, if someone clicks the download option, then maybe that's what they'll go to, and they'll forget that they were in the middle of a transaction, or maybe they open any of these as a PDF, and then like you've lost their attention. How are you even going to get it back? It's really hard. If anyone like has a brilliant solution to this that works across all platforms for the web, then please come and see me afterwards. I'll buy you a drink, several drinks. So I suppose that kind of leads me to a thing that I wanted to finish on, because we hear a lot about what is happening to people's attention in the context of social media and the internet generally. And there's stuff like this. Facebook enhances intelligence, but Twitter diminishes it, claims psychologist. It's bad news for me. I spend a lot of time on Twitter and 0 time on Facebook. It bothers me a bit. Facebook and the internet can rewire your brain and shorten your attention span. Okay. The things about this that bother me more than anything else are that, this is a person from Oxford University, which is pretty old and distinguished, and this is almost important as climate change. Really? Okay. And this is my favorite, absolutely. So Nicholas Carr talking about what is happening to our brains in the internet age, and says, our habits are thought, but it can exert an actual physical influence on the neurons and synapses in our brains. Just let that sink in for a minute. Right. If that is not happening to you, you are dead. Okay? Everything that you do, everything that you experience changes your brain in some fundamental way. So this kind of thing, please don't take this too seriously. When you read this, critically evaluate it. Just look at it and go, wait a minute, what is he actually saying? He is saying that new experiences and perceptions and memories change our brains. Good, they're supposed to. And I actually think that mobiles have helped us a lot. Like, my mobile is basically, my phone is my outboard brain. It's this kind of extra piece of thing that does a lot of thinking for me. It does a lot of the heavy lifting for me, which is good because I need help with the lifting. I'm not very good at paying attention and remembering a lot of things. So what it does is it stores my contacts. I cannot remember all that information. I used to try, but I can't. It stores things that I'm learning. I'm learning Swedish right now, so it helps me remember those things. It stores my diary appointments. It reminds me when I need to go to something, which is amazing. It stores all of the things I will never remember, like my logins and my secure passwords and things like that. If it's secure, and you've all seen the XKCD cartoon about secure passwords, right? So, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I want to read later. What this is doing is it's basically, it's managing my attention for me. It's managing my memory for me. It's going, right, here is a place to put all the things that you need to know later. And then when you need to know them, you can come and get them. And before you need to know them, you don't have to spend a lot of attention, a lot of cycles worrying about them, worrying about forgetting them, or just trying to maintain them in memory so that you don't forget them. This is a way of parking all of that information so that I can get on with doing my job and living my life. And that, to me, is an amazing thing. Do I think it's damaging my ability to remember things? No, honestly, no. Before I parked all my stuff in a phone, I would have to remember so many different things, and the remembering of those things would stop me from remembering other things. You know, you only have so much capacity in your brain, really, well, you have infinite capacity, but in practice, in your kind of, in your attention, in your short-term memory, you can only hold so much. And it's a very leaky kind of bucket, you know, stuff falls out all the time. So I think it's quite healthy to be able to say, I'm offloading all this stuff to my device. And when I need it, I know where to find it, and I will go and look for it. And in the meantime, I'm going to think 100% about the thing that I'm doing right now, which is addressing all of you, and not trying to remember some phone number or email address or thing that I have to do tomorrow. So in summary, please don't listen to the crazy people. But if you decide that I am wrong and that they are not crazy, that's totally okay as well. I want you to make that decision for yourself and not just listen to me. So, to summarize, think about the order in which people perceive information, because that has implications for how they engage with your user interface. Think about the context in which people are using your stuff and what notices and what help they might need to retain a sense of where they are and what they are doing. Particularly if you make big changes. Don't be afraid to try mobile first design. Even if you're designing a desktop application and it will never be used on mobile, have a go. I think it's really instructive. It really makes you focus. And don't make it more simple than it has to be. It should only be as simple as it needs to be and no more so. And above all, please be really critical when you hear people talking about neuroscience to do with absolutely anything, but especially around kind of cognition and thinking and attention and so on, and that does include me as well. That's it. I'm done. Yes. For anyone who didn't hear the question, it was, is there a difference between male and female attention or adults versus children? Male and female, not really. I know that there is, as far as I know, there is a popular idea that men can't multitask and women can multitask. I'm not aware of any data about that, and I think it's a very popular question always to ask, are men and women the same or are they different? And I like to think of it as a continuum, like, do you all know about the normal distribution? Like the idea that, so if we think about shoe size for men and women, right? So if this is a graph and this is big shoes and small shoes, if women have those shoes, it's sort of in that distribution, right? So there's an average women's shoe size, but some women have bigger shoes and some women have smaller shoes, and there's this kind of normal distribution. And then men have a distribution of shoe size as well. There's some overlap, right? The two curves overlap. And that's the case for almost everything ever. So it may be that there is, in the absolute, there might be a slight difference in the means. Sometimes that is, a tiny difference. Sometimes it's a big difference. But a lot of the time, when we talk about sex differences, people are like, oh yeah, men are this and women are this, and they're totally different. And actually, often there's this huge overlap. So I get a bit uncomfortable talking about sex differences because people then take it away and say, oh, men are totally different. And so as far as I know, there's no difference in attention between men and women. In terms of adults and children, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to give you an informal answer because I'm not sure about the kind of the formal research on this topic. My understanding is that adults have greater capacity to attend to more things. Children's capacity is very low. Part of the reason I know this is that I used to teach martial arts to children and adults. And you could say to an adult, don't do it like this, do it like that. And the adult would do, not like that, but like this. They would do it right. And you would say to kids, don't do it like that, do it like this. And the kids just stop at the don't do it like that. And all they see is that bit, and then they're off, right? And they're doing exactly the thing that you don't want them to do. It's like they could only hold a smaller amount of information. So like whatever you tell them first is the thing that they focus on. That's a kind of informal anecdote, though. Formally, I'm pretty sure that until they're about, now that's a good question. Let's say 12 to 15, kind of. I mean, even after that, people's brains are still forming and refining the connections and so on. But like under, let's say, 12 or so, children's brains are still really developing quite a lot. Sorry, that was a very long answer. Any more?
Yeah, that's one more again. Can you say 30 words about
Toggle buttons. 30 words about toggle buttons. Oh my god. Exactly 30 words, or can I do it in 29? Okay. I think toggle buttons are really difficult. I'm often unsure whether they are showing me the action or the state. So am I seeing a triangle because I should press play, or am I seeing a triangle because it is playing? And I have not yet answered this question very well in my head. I don't know how we solve that problem. That's probably 40 words. It's a good question. Other senses like sound and touch and things like that. What to say about those? Sound operates a lot of the same attentional rules as vision. They both, they're very different, but they follow a lot of similar rules. Touch is a bit different. Touch is very, very immediate. Smell is really interesting, by the way. So, little fact for you. Most of the senses that we have, like touch and seeing and hearing, they go through a lot of filtering before you actually really perceive them properly. Smell doesn't. Smell is much less filtered. It just kind of goes boom, and it just kind of hits you, which is one of the reasons why when we smell something, it can remind us, it can take us back in time to when we were children or whatever, because there's less sort of conscious filtering happening in the brain. Sorry, again, that seems like a inadequate answer. Any more? Any more from, anyone else? Oh, yes, please. That's a good question. I didn't show you one there, so I can go back. So this is a question about the tagging example. This is when you find out how many slides I have. It's a ridiculous number. Yeah, okay. Oh, here we go. So what I would have done is from here, I would have added an animation on those new tags. I would have kind of made it blink or flash or do something to indicate, hey, this is where your attention should go right now, and you can see now the tags. So that's using a kind of cheap attentional trick of making something flash or glow or do something interesting so that people orient their attention towards it, and then they see what you want them to see. Yes. Yes. Good question. The question was: is for mobile only? Are there any? Is there anything too complex to be shown on a small screen? Surgery? I don't know. I haven't come across a problem where I've thought we cannot do this on mobile. But I'm pretty sure there are people working in medicine and aerospace and things like that where there's just so much that you need. It depends. Like if there's a path that you're following through it, why not break it down into small screen, small screen, small screen, small screen? But if you simultaneously need to monitor a million things, air traffic control would be another one, I guess. Then, maybe you're just going to have to work on a big screen. Thank you. Is that it? Yep. Okay, great. Thank you all very much.